I remember the summer of 2018. I had recently started my YouTube channel and was on the lookout for currently airing TV shows to make videos about. At the time, I was watching the HBO miniseries Sharp Objects and thought it might be a good topic for a video, seeing as it was somewhat relevant and people seemed to be enjoying the show. In the end, I never made that video because despite thoroughly enjoying the series, I could only really think of one aspect of the show to comment on, which was how that show used flashbacks. Sharp Objects is the story of Camille Preaker, a crime reporter recently discharged from a psychiatric hospital due to her alcoholism and years of self-harming, who returns to her hometown Windgap to investigate the murders of two young girls. Back home, she finds herself confronted with her passive-aggressively domineering mother, the relationship from which most of her problems stem. And so the use of flashbacks serves an obvious purpose. Camille's return to Windgap is the catalyst for this resurgence of memories she must deal with in order to resolve these deep-seated issues. But what's really memorable about these flashbacks is Jean-Marc Vallée's stylistic presentation. They are short and abrupt, hitting Camille suddenly without warning, and so we can imagine these little shots appear in the editing timeline as short cuts, mimicking the scars on Camille's body. The flashbacks are visual scars, constant, painful reminders of the past.
Did you see something?
I didn't think this was really enough to make an entire video out of, but it led me to a different idea, talking about how flashbacks are used in film, the different techniques, the different narrative purposes, and how these films explore the theme of memory in a variety of ways. The idea of tracing the entire history of flashbacks in cinema in a gradual regress all the way down to the very first flashback ever put to film seemed like an interesting premise for one of these pretentious video essays. But perhaps it's a bit too ambitious. So to calm myself down a bit, I decide to try and actually remember as many films that include interesting explorations of memory that I can think of off the top of my head. And as I do, a melody quietly seeps into my mind. Of course, I couldn't possibly make a video about films that deal with memory without talking about a movie that's been such a long-standing favourite of mine. I've loved Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind since the very first time I saw it, and it's a film I've rewatched periodically over the years. But upon rewatching it for this video, I was reminded of one of the first times I saw the film. I don't remember if it was the first or the second or the third time. I just recall waking up really early one day back when I was maybe 13 or 14 and not being able to get back to sleep, so I decided to put this film on to help me get through those boring first few hours of the day. And for some reason, I found myself strongly relating to Joel's character who, in the opening of the film, randomly decides to ditch work and hop on a train to Montauk for no apparent reason. This sequence is imbued with such strong nostalgic power for me. It reminds me of when I was a kid and I'd wake up really early to watch cartoons or go play outside, and the landscapes were misty and the grass covered in dew. I felt like I was all alone in my own little world. Or the days where I'd miss school because it was snowy outside and the buses weren't running. That special feeling that comes with knowing that you're not supposed to be here right now, which imbues the day with a sensation of spontaneity, which is exactly what happens to Joel on his little outing, and is personified in the character of Clementine. But of course, in his case, this isn't really a spontaneous decision. He's already done this before. After a particularly traumatic relationship, Joel decides to erase his memory, a procedure his girlfriend Clementine had also gone through in order to forget him. But during the procedure, Joel realizes he doesn't want to forget, and for most of the film he attempts to fight the erasure, only to fail in the end. but he leaves the experience with one lasting memory, the memory of Clementine telling him to meet her in Montauk, something he doesn't consciously remember but seems to guide his behavior after waking up, and so at the end of the film, we find ourselves back at the beginning. The point being that erasing your memory of a bad relationship means you won't remember why it failed. Erasing your past means you will never learn from it, and you will simply be doomed to repeat those same mistakes over and over again. You're not solving the problem by forgetting your past, you're just assuring that you'll have to do the work all over again. Which is kind of what happens in another favourite from my teenage years, which was Chris Nolan's Memento. Like Eternal Sunshine, this is another one where the concept of memory is intelligently built into the construction of the film. In the case of Eternal Sunshine, the story kind of loops back on itself, and of course in Memento, the plot is presented in reverse. Memory is used as a narrative gimmick of sorts. It is manipulated in order to lead to the film's climactic twist. And while the structural idiosyncrasy of portraying events in reverse is a very effective way of putting us into the shoes of a character with anterograde amnesia, Memento isn't really a film I feel too strongly about anymore. So instead of talking about Memento, I'm going to jump straight into another film that deals with the same condition we see in this one. That film is a Japanese documentary by Hirokazu Koreeda called Without Memory, which examines the life of a man who can no longer form new memories.
Once, when he was fishing with his children, he caught a carp that was badly scarred. The next day, he could still visualize that carp.
釣り上げたシーンどうするの全然わかんないんだけど、魚が傷だらけで、どうしてこんなに傷だらけなんだろうと思って池に返したっていうのだけは覚えてる。その全部はない。誰が釣ったとか、どういうふうに行ってどうに帰ってきたかったんだろう。
そこだけ、傷だらけの船だけ。
なんで俺の頭の中にその傷だらけの船の絵があるんだろうっていうだけで。
Whenever I experience a slight memory lapse, I'm reminded of this film, and it terrifies me.
どうぞ突然聞くけど、これは現実。
これは現実。
今は現実で。
But the truly tragic dimension of this story isn't just the man's suffering, but his family's too. His wife especially has to bear this great burden, knowing she will have to carry the weight of both their memories on her shoulders for the rest of their lives.
Thank you for your letter. I really enjoyed hearing from you. It's already November. I wonder how many years it's been since I stopped remembering. My mind is a blank. I have no idea what kind of day I've had. But I've decided to stop brooding. Even if I don't know the past, I've decided to look to the future. If by chance I've already sent you this letter, please excuse me. I don't see a copy, so I write you in the belief that I've not yet written. In any case, I've decided that if there's anything from before that I'm not sure about, I'll just do it over again. Otherwise, I'm left with a self that is simply nothing. Your letter meant so much to me. It made me feel that I'm still connected with all of you. Thank you.
And while Without Memory is a melancholy look at the Sisyphean life of a man trapped in the present, and also the lives of those who must live with him and the strength and devotion they display, it's a documentary, and there are no flashbacks here, so why am I even talking about this film? Well, because it's a good documentary and it's available on YouTube, and I just wanted to recommend it to you. Sue me. And also because the theme of memory is something that comes up a lot in Koreeda's films. He likes stories that feature characters who have complicated relationships with their past. And one of his films that does feature flashbacks, is Afterlife. A film that takes place in a social services type building that receives dead people. Every Monday, a new set of recently deceased people check in, and the social workers then ask the dead people to choose one single memory from their entire lives to take with them into the afterlife. And after they decide on their happiest memory, the workers then stage and film the scenes. after which the souls will be able to experience that moment for eternity. So unlike most of the other films I'll be talking about in this video, not only are the characters confronted with their memories, they are forced to consider their entire lives in search of the very best one, which is an extremely engaging premise because, of course, the viewer will inevitably find themselves trifling through their own past, looking for that perfect moment. But the film does a lot with its already inherently interesting premise. Contrasts are drawn between people of different demographics.
塩を全然3月の2日の晩の戦闘から塩分っていうのを取らないからこの力がないですね。でこうやってもしょっぱくないですよ。だから
お腹が空いちゃってホットケーキを食べに行こうって話になってディズニーランドのホットケーキってすごい美味しくってそれで食べに行ったんだけど
The juxtaposition of an old man's wartime reminiscence with the memory of a teenage girl has the potential to create new meaning, telling us something about the country's history, comparing the different worlds these separate generations grew up in, thus creating a complex tapestry of 20th century Japan. When a middle-aged man says that his favorite memory is from middle school, there's a certain sadness to that, an implication that nothing that came after ever topped that period of his life. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we value individual memories too much. Does your life really have to be a competition with your past self? A constant striving to surpass the best moments of your youth? Or is a single moment of ecstatic joy perhaps outweighed by a decade of bliss and tranquility?
考え直さないとね。
この体制を考え直すべきだと思うんですけどね。
And yes, the flashbacks aren't real flashbacks, so to speak. They're constructed on sets to be filmed by the crew. However, and I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this is what all flashbacks are. Fakes. Not just fake reconstructions of the past, but fake reconstructions of a fictional character's past. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what is probably my favourite film of all time, because I know I make videos about incest anime sometimes, but I'd just like to remind you all that I actually have very highbrow tastes. Never forget that. Despite many people's seeming inability to summarize the plot of Tarkovsky's The Mirror because of its non-linear structure and the modernist stream of consciousness associations the story draws from one scene to the next, there is actually a pretty clear progression to the story. The spine of the plot is the present-day post-war storyline, which follows a poet in his 40s and his relationships with his son, ex-wife, and mother. Every other scene in the film is either flashback, archival footage, or dream sequence, and these memories are connected to the present through subconscious associations or through characters in the present explicitly reminiscing about the past.
Ты знаешь, как странно. Я тебя только что во сне видел. Как будто я еще ребенок. Кстати, мам, а в каком году от нас отец ушел? В 36-м или 37-м?
Ну, во-первых, в 35-м. А потом зачем тебе все это? Ты знаешь, Лиза умерла.
Какая Лиза?
Ну, Лиза. Лиза это Павловна, с которой мы в типографии работали.
Типография. Следующая остановка Серпуховская.
And so the story freely weaves in and out of the past, and this is perhaps what makes the film so hard to summarize. You will find yourself in the middle of a scene wondering how you got there. The film flows seamlessly from moment to moment, and the fact that we never really see our main character, only hearing his voice as he interacts with other characters and provides voiceover where he recites poetry, serves to place the viewer in Alexei's subjectivity. Tarkovsky's ethereal visual direction places us not only in his mind in the present, but also allows us to feel as though we are navigating through his memories and dreams. The camera, and therefore the viewer, becomes one with the inner experience of the character. Many scenes in the film depart from realism to emphasize the feeling of a moment, rather than a kind of objective representation of it. This is what leads many people to label the film as poetic, as well as the sensorial associations drawn between images that serve to transition from one scene to the next. from present to past, and from memory to dream. The through line of the film is Alexei's relationship with his mother, Maria, and how his past relationships are mirrored in the present. And beyond a Freudian reading of the film, this is why one actress plays both Alexei's mother in the past and his wife in the present, and why the same actor plays Alexei's younger self and his own son, to demonstrate how Alexei's present relationships parallel the formative dynamics of his childhood, as we can see in this transition from a flashback where the younger Alexei and his sister are reunited with their absent father, to a scene in the present where Alexei's ex-wife accuses him of being too distant with their son Ignat. A parallel is drawn between Alexei and his father. The cycle repeats. Another notable example being Alexei's memory of a burning barn, beautifully contrasted with the rain dripping from the roof in the foreground, perhaps the film's most iconic shot, which is mirrored in this scene in the present where Alexei and his wife watch their son start a fire through the rainy window of their apartment. Believe it or not, I didn't actually grow up in 1930s Soviet Russia, but somehow in the mirror, Tarkovsky manages to invoke within me the same kind of nostalgia I feel with regards to the places where I grew up. And this entire hypnotic puzzle of a film is a healing process, curing the ailments of the present Alexei by trifling through his past. This is why the film opens with a scene where a young man with a stutter is seemingly cured through hypnotherapy. This sets the viewer up for a film that is basically cinematic hypnotherapy. And Tarkovsky ends the film with a sequence that joins the beginning with the end. We see the present-day Maria walking through a field with Alexei and her sister as they were long ago, and we cut back to the young Maria with her husband talking about their yet-to-be-born child, as if their entire future is contained within that knowing smile. Perhaps a kind of reconciliation of the present with the past. But there is another film about a dying poet remembering his past I want to talk about, and that is Theo Angelopoulos' Eternity and a Day. In this film, Angelopoulos' looming camera work slowly guides us through memories. The film opens with a flashback, from which our main character Alexander awakens, with the taste of the sea still in his mouth, from this childhood memory.
Εδώ κοιμηθήκατε. Και δεν φάγατε τίποτα πάλι.
Έχω μια γεύση αλμύρας θάλασσας στο στόμα.
The lasting taste of the past is a central theme in the story. Early on in the film, Alexander visits his daughter, who reads him an old letter written by his deceased wife, Anna, and as she reads, Anna's voice takes over, and so Alexander returns to her, a memory of her.
Το μωρό από δίπλα μουρμούρισε ένα σιγανό παράπονο. Μια πόρτα έτρεξε. Βγήκα στη βεράντα και έκλαψα.
Καλημέρα, Άννα. Παράξενα όνειρα βλέπω τον τελευταίο καιρό.
But in this flashback, Alexander retains his present form, bringing with him to this reminiscence the burden of the present, because we can never truly return to the past. Even in our memories, we perceive them from the distant view of our present selves. Anna's narration of the letter recurs periodically throughout the film, serving as communication between the past and the present. Eternity and a Day is the story of the last day of a dying poet, and so these reminiscences are not just aimless musings, they are the recollections of a man on the precipice of death, grasping for the only thing he has left, his memories. After finishing the film, I tell myself that I've never seen a better portrayal of the transience of a life lived, and I write this down because it sounds cool. But this talk of transience brings me back to Japan, because if there's one culture that's most in touch with the concept of the transience of all things, it might be the Japanese, a sentiment that is encapsulated in the common phrase mono no aware. Mono no aware. Mono no aware. Mono no aware. Fuck. That's gonna sound stupid. and this concept has been explored by many of Japan's greatest filmmakers. In Satoshi Kon's Millennium Actress, the memories of Chiyoko's real life are mixed with and blended into the roles of her acting career, creating a fragmented and at times disorienting tapestry of a woman's life that is both representative of her fading memory and of something much deeper, which is the connection between reality and fiction and how one comments on and feeds into the other. Chiyoko's journey is one that traces Japan's troubled history through the 20th century, often finding herself entangled in the political complexities of her times. It's a personal story that serves as a synecdoche for a societal one. Perhaps this is why the color palette of the flashbacks is so often dominated by whites and reds, the colors of the nation. And then we have Isao Takahata's masterpiece, Only Yesterday, where 27-year-old Taeko decides to take a trip to the countryside away from Tokyo, where she has spent her entire life and now works. There she visits the family of her brother-in-law, and throughout the story she recollects memories from 1966, an important year of her childhood.
私は今度の旅行に小学校5年生の私を連れてくるつもりはなかった。
But the point of these flashbacks is not to reanimate within Taeko a desire to become an actress or anything like that. It's something deeper. They reanimate within Taeko a longing for something different, not a return to her own past, her own roots, but perhaps to the country's roots. A return to a simpler way of life, unencumbered by everything we see in the opening shots of the film.
5年生の私がつきまとうのは 自分を振り返ってもう一度羽ばたき直してごらん。
But the film doesn't insist on the inherent importance of any specific memory. It simply embraces the ephemeral quality of the past. Like in this scene where the young Taeko interacts with a boy from her school. We never see this boy again, nor is any other romantic relationship pursued in these flashbacks. The memories of that specific boy will fade, but the feeling remains, as we see after cutting back to the present where Taeko recalls the interaction and immediately erupts into a nostalgic fit of joy. The point is that each of these memories evokes a transitory time in Taeko's life, whether it's her first love, her first pineapple, the girls and boys learning about periods for the first time, or Taeko being offered an opportunity that would potentially change her life forever. These flashbacks are a herald of change, urging Taeko to accept this new beginning she finds herself confronted with in the present. And of course, the fading of the specifics of memory is perfectly conveyed visually through the faded borders and backgrounds of the flashbacks, evoking the limits of memory in painting a clear and accurate picture of the past. And then of course we have scenes where the film departs from realism entirely to better depict the reality of a child's inner experience. Shuji Terayama uses a similar method of embracing magical realism as a way of evoking the surreal quality of childhood memories in his films. And what Terayama captures best is the impressionistic quality of childhood memories, as we see in the bright colours of Grass Labyrinth or Pastoral Hide and Seek, where the rainbow filters of the past are contrasted with the cold, bleak black and white of the one scene set in the present. But memories aren't always a source of pleasant nostalgia or self-fulfillment in cinema. Sometimes memory can be manipulated, and the past finds itself misinterpreted. This is the case in a film like The Thin Blue Line, Errol Morris's highly influential true crime documentary about the wrongful conviction of Randall Dale Adams for the murder of Texas police officer Robert Wood. The film established or popularized many of the true crime gimmicks that have become ubiquitous within the genre, notably the crime reenactment scenes. And in The Thin Blue Line, we return to this scene many times throughout the film. But as the story progresses and new information is revealed, the reconstruction changes. Whether it's the police officer's position during the shooting, the make of the car, or the silhouettes of the people inside. A great example of this is when an unreliable witness tells a story that changes the details of the account. Something similar occurs in Clouseau's La Vérité, where we witness the trial of Dominique, a young woman who seemingly murdered her ex-lover and then immediately attempted suicide. The flashbacks recounting the events of Dominique's life leading up to the crime are presented as objective and faithful reconstructions of reality, conforming to Dominique's version of the events. But other characters put them into question, and so we, the viewer, can never be entirely certain of their veracity. And of course, this is the whole point of Kurosawa's Rashomon. The truth of a murder is disputed between several witnesses during the trial: a bandit, the dead man's wife, and then the dead man himself through a medium. The facts seem to conform to the agendas of each party involved. But of course, this entire narrative is being told through the framing device of two men who were at the trial, recounting the entire story to another man who takes shelter from the rain. But they also have their own agendas. One of them recounts the fourth and final version of the story, which in some respects seems perhaps closer to the truth, one big difference being the fight scene. In the bandit's account, the fight was short, intense, and skillful. In the other man's account, the fight is long, clumsy, and pretty lame. But even this version is unreliable, seeing as the man recounting it seems to be trying to hide the fact that he stole a valuable dagger he found at the scene of the crime, maybe even the dagger the man used to kill himself, if we trust the medium's version. Point being that this is a story about the uncertainty of memory, an epistemic mystery that heavily burdens those who hear it, because it's a reminder of the impossibility of truly attaining any kind of real objective truth. The torrential downpour on the ruins of the temple where the three men take shelter only serves to underline the God is dead style nihilism of this conclusion. But perhaps misremembered or embellished memories aren't always a bad thing. For example, in Tim Burton's Big Fish, or similarly in Terry Gilliam's Adventures of Baron Munchausen, this embellishment and manipulation of the past is a reminder of the purpose of storytelling. In these stories, the questioning of the narrator's fables is something to be overcome. These are the fabulist uses of flashbacks, where the stories of one's past are enhanced and mythologized to reveal deeper truths about the human experience and reality. These films are odes to imagination. And of course, continuing on with this theme, I can't avoid talking about the cinematic epitome of memory manipulation, which is Alain Resnais's Last Year at Marienbad, which tells the story of, it's the story of a man and a woman who meet in a hotel. The man claims that the two of them met the year before at Marienbad, but the woman denies this, stating that they've never met before. That's it. That's the plot. The most superficial description of Last Year at Marienbad will tell you that the film feels like a dream. The story weaves in and out of scenes with a seeming lack of logical connectors. Characters wander from room to room through the corridors of this labyrinthine Baroque building, the only real through line being the question of, did they really meet last year at Marienbad? But as vacuous as the "it feels like a dream" description always is, it certainly applies here. I remember the first few times I attempted to watch this film, I would always find myself falling asleep about half an hour into it, because the film is not only slow, it's hypnotic. The characters themselves appear as though they are navigating a dream, and I've rewatched the film twice for this video, and I must admit that when I start the film, my brain immediately assumes we're taking a nap, which is entirely appropriate because I think the best way to watch this film is half asleep. It all makes sense if you think you're dreaming it. But what really gives the film its reputation as one of the most cryptic films ever made is its focus on absolute subjectivity. Alain Robbe-Grillet, who wrote this film and has written and directed a multitude of other films with similar thematic concerns and atmospheres, sees memory as indifferentiable from the imaginary. A past remembered is a past constructed from one's imagination, and is subject to many potential manipulations and trickery. As Robbe-Grillet wrote in the introduction of the novelization of the film, the whole film, as a matter of fact, is the story of a persuasion. It deals with a reality which the hero creates out of his own vision, out of his own words. A great example is this scene where, after a while, the woman seemingly starts to remember. When the man describes her bedroom, she continues the description, as if she was slowly being seduced by the man's creation. The film deals with the most primal method of storytelling, which is the human mind's capacity to construct reality. After all, our life is a story we continuously tell ourselves, and this film is simply an illustration of that inner subjectivity, of that inner process of storytelling. But while memory may be a construction of the imagination, it can also be a melancholy or even painful reality. In David Lean's 1970 film Ryan's Daughter, the eponymous character's love interest has just returned from war and finds himself afflicted with PTSD. And in their first meeting, we find one of my favourite transitions of all time. Over the years, filmmakers have come across a variety of ways of manifesting the pain of the past. In Chris Marker's La Jetée, a traumatic and singular memory that would scar the main character for his entire life is depicted in still photographs, an ingenious way of representing the stillness of the past, which finds itself petrified in time, unchangeable. And this, of course, makes all the more sense when you reach the twist ending of the film. In Bergman's Autumn Sonata and Cries and Whispers, flashbacks inform the domestic drama that plays out on screen in the present. The troubled character dynamics are not immediately clear to us and are slowly revealed as the film progresses and we gain deeper insight into these complicated pasts. These scenes reveal the unspoken truths underlying the family drama, wounds that never quite healed. In Autumn Sonata, the flashbacks are visually distinct from the rest of the film, presented in unmoving wide shots, evoking a kind of distant, omniscient perspective. These flashbacks aren't personal and subjective. They're a cold, dead, unchanging object of the past. In Magnetic Rose, however, the past isn't so dead. 1/3 of the 1995 Memories anthology, Magnetic Rose, directed by Koji Morimoto and written by Satoshi Kon, tells the story of the crew of the Corona, a space freighter that comes across a giant space station surrounded by debris. Inside, the crew's 2 engineers experience paranormal encounters, seemingly related to a once famous opera diva named Eva Friedel. It turns out that Eva murdered her fiancé Carlo after he refused to marry her, and then she simply disappeared. The Eva apparitions are actually an AI hologram that seduces men who enter the station and tricks them into thinking that they are Carlo, in order to relive her past as it should have happened. This is what happens to Miguel, one of the engineers, while Heinz, the other one, is confronted with his own past. Eva manifests a painful memory where his young daughter tragically dies. Eva takes the shape of his wife and tells him that he will never leave, indicating that there is no escaping the past, and inviting him to join her in her own tragic reenactment of it. She uses Heinz's trauma against him in order to lure him into her illusion, which itself is merely a manifest memory of the real Eva Friedel, an old wound, a ghost. In Citizen Kane, flashbacks are pieces of a puzzle to the central mystery of the film, which is Charles Foster Kane himself. A puzzle that is never really solved because, as one of my favourite authors, Jorge Luis Borges, puts it in his review of the movie, Citizen Kane is a kind of metaphysical detective story. Its subject, both psychological and allegorical, is the investigation of a man's inner self through the works he has wrought, the words he has spoken, the many lives he has ruined. Overwhelmingly, endlessly, Orson Welles shows fragments of the life of the man Charles Foster Kane and invites us to combine them and to reconstruct him. Charles Foster Kane is a simulacrum, a chaos of appearances. In a story by Chesterton, The Head of Caesar, the hero observes that nothing is so frightening as a labyrinth with no center. This film is precisely that labyrinth, because the accuracy of these flashbacks that are used to recount Kane's life is never entirely clear. Are these flashbacks the memories of Charles Kane or the memories of those who knew him? Biased, personal accounts of the man. The flashbacks never show Kane alone, and the camera is oftentimes locked into other characters' perspectives. I especially love this scene where Kane is framed between Jebediah and Mr. Bernstein during this conversation. Even in the reverse shot, he remains enclosed between them in the window's reflection. Kane is not the subject of these flashbacks, he is the object of them, an object of mystery whose true self will forever be unknowable to us. This is quite the opposite of what we find in Ernst Lubitsch's 1943 classic Heaven Can Wait, where after dying, Henry Van Cleve finds himself in the reception area of hell, where he begins to tell the devil the story of his life in order to prove that he does in fact belong in hell. Whereas Citizen Kane is the story of a man remembered, a fragmented biography coloured by the personal opinions and attitudes of those who construct it, Heaven Can Wait is the story of a man recounting his own life, a man's inward view of the morality of his exploits. A similar concept, but with entirely different execution, can be found in Claude Sauté's film The Things of Life. The film starts with a car crash, and the rest of the story jumps back and forth in time, presenting the last days of Pierre. But even within these flashbacks, our main character is confronted with memories. On top of this, flashes of the car crash are littered throughout the film, almost as to constantly remind the viewer that these scenes are the memories flashing before Pierre's eyes in his last moments. Unlike in Heaven Can Wait, we don't need a summary of the man's entire life to get a grasp of his character, only his last day on Earth, because, as we see in the film, the man's entire life is contained within this one day. Every present moment carries with it the weight of the past. But the last third of the film explores the aftermath of the accident, as Pierre finds himself drifting in and out of consciousness, falling back into memories and hallucinations until he finally dies. The story of the character who finds themselves at the end of their life recollecting a selection of important memories is a narrative formula that has been used many times throughout the history of film. Another example is Marcel Carné's Le Jour se lève, or Daybreak in English, where Francois, after murdering a man, locks himself in his apartment. As the police besiege the building, he begins to reflect on the series of events that led to this situation. Or Bergman's Wild Strawberries, where an old professor sets out on a long car ride, meeting hitchhikers along the way who each remind him of a time in his past. But the very first film to establish this formula in cinema was, in fact, the very first film to make use of flashbacks. Ferdinand Zecca's History of a Crime recounts the crime, trial, and imprisonment of an out-of-work carpenter who robs a bank, is then arrested at a cafe, and subsequently reflects on his life while in jail. Flashbacks appear on the wall of the man's cell, an early use of image superimposition. The film presents a deterministic sequence of the man's life, leading to and explaining the crime. The duration of the short film, which is only 5 minutes, the quick succession of the events in the story, and the short fragments of the man's life presented to us in the flashbacks give a somewhat melancholy but ultimately naturalistic image of a man's life and how things can go so wrong so fast. Naturalistic in the literary sense, meaning that a character's life can be examined as determined by their social circumstances, a kind of objective look at the series of events. The film starts with a crime and ends with an execution, with the story of a man's entire life told in between, all within 5 minutes. So now let me ask you this. What place do memories hold in your life? Are they a depressing reminder of the deterministic nature of the universe? A subjective mechanism through which you manipulate your life story? Or a nostalgic window you use to look back on happy memories?